Welcome, everyone. Welcome to the Consulting Mindset webinar series. Today, we'll be focusing on the imposter syndrome and strategic thinking. Thank you for finding time to spend an hour or so with us. Our session is planned to take about 1 hour with about a 15-minute Q&A session at the end. There will be points where we'll be asking you to interact with the speaker, and we will be answering some of your questions at the end of the session. Today's session, all right, admitting a few more people. Today's session is brought to you by Red Queen Associates, 50,000 Foot, and the SkillRanch Podcast. My name is Trent Poplar. I'm the president of 50,000 Foot, and I will be your moderator for this webinar. Just a few logistical points as we get started. First, please leave your videos turned off and have your microphones muted while the speaker is doing the presentation. This will ensure that there's no interruptions during the session. Second, we will have a formal Q&A session at the end. Having said that, if you have questions while we're progressing, please record them in the chat, and our team will catch it and ensure that they get asked to the speaker during points of feedback or during the Q&A. Please refrain from personal messages to the speaker, as Chris will not be monitoring messages as he goes through his presentation. We will provide more information on Chris and his contacts, our contacts, and so forth at the end of the session. So if you do not get a question answered today, we will provide you with a way to get in touch with Chris and 50,000 Foot and the SkillRanch Podcast. Okay, Chris. So today's session, we are fortunate to have with us Chris Anstead, president of Red Queen Associates. Chris is a highly experienced, well-respected management consultant known for his leadership and sage guidance. Throughout his career, Chris has managed many consulting firms, ran his own practice, and shaped new consultants while leading programs for an accredited business school. He's an author, a coach, and a mentor. Chris's knowledge of the industry and what it means to be a consultant will help us better understand the consulting mindset. At this point, I would like to thank Chris for providing his time today to hold this discussion with us, and I will hand the reins over to Chris. Chris, you're on.
Great, thanks very much, Trent. So today, what we're going to talk about really is the strategic thinking and how it relates to the imposter syndrome. The imposter syndrome we'll spend a few minutes on, and then I'll go into the competencies and components of strategic thinking. There will be some examples, some case-based examples that I'll speak to. And at the end of the session, if we have time, I do want to do a little bit of a case exercise, but we'll see if we can make that happen. So I'm just going to shut down my own video and start talking about the slide. So on the slide, as you can see, there's a circle diagram to the left. And this is one way of conceptualizing what the imposter syndrome actually is. If you've not experienced it, or you've experienced it but don't realize that you have, this is what we're talking about. So the imposter syndrome is this sense that you're standing in front of people who know a lot more than you do, that you're being asked to solve problems by people who know more about the problem than you'll ever know, or that you're joining a group of people who just know vastly greater amounts of information than you know around a topic. So in the diagram, the little pink circle at the bottom is what you know when you walk into a situation. And the big blue circle is what you think everybody else knows. Now we will return to this diagram in a little bit and talk about another way to conceptualize it that might be helpful. But before we do that, I wanted to move to the right on this slide and talk really about, for consultants, the imposter syndrome really has to do with this question of adding value, especially when you're new in the consulting world. If you don't have experience with a particular industry, you don't have experience with a particular market or issue, you might feel like you don't have a say. You shouldn't be asked your opinion, or you can't bring value to your consultants. Generally, people with the imposter syndrome actually can have emotional consequences to this. There's often a fear associated with the imposter syndrome. It's the fear of being found out, the fear of being exposed, It's also a feeling, you might have a feeling of inadequacy. But the interesting thing is that the imposter syndrome generally affects people who have actually had some success, who have got to a situation where people actually are looking to them for their opinions, their guidance, and those are the people that most often suffer from the imposter syndrome. And it's not just consultants. We're talking about consultants today, but if you're fresh out of school, some of your profs probably had this. Some of your clients will have this. Your colleagues will have this. Your competitors will have this. Even experts on TV get the imposter syndrome. So it's not a unique situation for us. I will be talking about a unique way in which we can solve it, but I do want to say that it's more than just consultants. Okay, so this slide is another way of thinking about the imposter effect. This is a slide, as you can see, it's called the Dunning-Kruger effect, and it describes the relationship between confidence and competence that leads to, or can lead to, the imposter syndrome. So as you move from left to right on this graph, your competency is increasing. So when you first start learning about something, you've read one article, you saw a documentary on Netflix, you talk to somebody who's confident in an area, you might feel that you really know a lot about that thing, whatever that thing might be. Maybe it's COVID, maybe it's something else, supply chain, whatever. And you might have an intense amount of confidence in your competence in that topic. And in fact, you're overconfident. You've got more confidence than you should have. And analysts call that Mount Stupid. That is when you think you know, but you don't really know. As you move to the right on the graph, as you start to learn more about a topic, again, in the consulting field or just in life in general, you start to realize that, oh, wow, there's so much more to learn about this topic. There are people that have studied this topic for years. There's so many books. There's so many experiences that I could have. I'm never going to be an expert or even well-grounded in this topic. And that's when you start to fall into the valley of despair. The valley of despair is another way to describe the imposter syndrome. Being in the valley of despair means you're down in the bottom of this curve. Now, as I said, the imposter syndrome is something that hits everybody, not just consultants. And I want to talk briefly about the remedies that are out there for everybody. And there's a couple of approaches. One is you just stay on Mount Stupid. Now, there's some people that have jobs where they have to opine on topics at the drop of a hat. They have to know a little bit about everything. They might be on TV and always giving their opinions, or they might have some other reason that they just need to know a little bit about everything and be confident in that. So that works for those folks. They can stay on Mount Stupid, and for them, it's not Mount Stupid, it's Mount, that's my job, practical confidence. For the rest of us, though, we will move along the chart. And the things that we can do to help ourselves with the imposter syndrome, first of all, we have to own our success. We have to realize that the fact that we're facing this situation is because we actually have achieved things. We have moved along the curve. We are knowledgeable to a certain extent, and therefore we have to own that. We also have to look at how we talk to ourselves. Our self-talk can be so destructive in a situation like this. So you have to really step back and think about, what am I saying to myself? Am I disparaging myself, or am I giving myself encouragement? You can talk to somebody. You can talk to a coach. You can talk to a wellness professional. You can talk to a colleague, just to, again, talk through why you're feeling this sense of that you're a fraud. Another way to tackle the imposter syndrome is to get rid of the fear component. A lot of the imposter syndrome has to do with being afraid of criticism. But if you start accepting criticism as a positive, as something that can be constructive, that can help you in your practice, that can help you not slow down your team, not slow down your work, then the fear drops away because you're starting to welcome criticism. Finally, The other way to beat the imposter syndrome is just to keep moving to the right on this curve, to keep practicing the things that you're not sure about, to keep reading in the areas that you've started reading in, to start having those experiences that other people have had. And that's the final way that you beat the imposter syndrome, is you just grow out of it. So I want to move on to the next slide. And as you
Chris,
can
before you
see,
go on, sorry to interrupt, but the poll is now back up. Would you like to run it?
thanks, Trent. Yeah, why don't we run that right now? Okay, so as you can see, we're just asking you how often you get the feeling that you might be an imposter at work. Is it all the time? Is it frequently, just occasionally, or never? Okay, so we can see that the number that scored the most is sometimes, but when you add in sometimes and a lot of the time, most of the people in the room here have had some experience with the imposter syndrome, but a few people aren't there yet. So presumably you've dialed in to listen to the second half of the conversation here. For the rest of you, if this topic or this discussion today doesn't give you enough resources to start working on this, please feel free to reach out, and we can also share some of the other sort of wellness resources related to that. So going back to this slide, you can see now that we've recast the diagram on the left. The diagram on the left used to show sort of this massive blue circle above that we thought everybody else had control of, and a little pink dot at the bottom, which was what you knew. But the reality is everybody else in the world that you're stepping into, whether it's marketing, whether it's some technology area, whether it's some healthcare area, everybody else there just knows a limited amount as well. Some of them might have bigger circles than you, but each one of those white circles is somebody else out there in the world, one of your clients, your colleagues, your competitors, and they all know things, but they don't all know everything. Some people know more, some people know less, and there's some things that you know that nobody in that circle knows. So that's another way for you to kind of visualize what's going on when you're feeling the imposter syndrome. Now I've got on the right a few bullets that speak to the ways in which consultants can bring value even when they don't know a situation, they're not familiar with a particular market or problem. And some of these might be something you're already doing, and some of these might be things you hadn't thought about. So here are some ways that consultants can add value in a novel situation. They can challenge assumptions. Your clients come to the table with all kinds of history, and that history often means assumptions. So you can ask them to draw out those assumptions. You can challenge them. Maybe they haven't thought through what happens if your leadership team changes. Maybe they haven't thought through what happens if your biggest competitor goes out of business. There's all kinds of challenges behind any piece of work, and somebody with fresh eyes can bring that to the table. You can draw on analogy, history, or parallels. In other words, maybe they're doing something that's unique in the world of entertainment, but you've seen something in hospitality that looks just the same. You can bring that analogy to the table. Maybe you understand what was done in the 1970s that was very similar to what people are proposing to do in the 2020s. Perhaps you've seen something going on in another country or another market that you think is relevant. You can brainstorm. You can brainstorm with fresh eyes. I mean, your clients will brainstorm and they'll be good at it, but you bring something new to the table. You've had a different set of experiences, and that experience might mean that your brainstorming is more creative or has different elements than otherwise. You can emphasize that they focus on outcomes. So clients might get caught up in the process, they might get caught up in the metrics, and they might not be thinking through where we're trying to go with this. What are we trying to make the final outcome of this activity, and are we really focused on that, or are we just worried about getting there? Focus more on the journey than the destination. You can bring an alternative form of analysis. Alternative forms of analysis, maybe you're a quant person and all their work has been qualitative, or within the qualitative world, maybe you bring a more critical perspective than the kind of analysis they've been doing. You can work the alignment question. Clients need to be sure that what they're pushing, the initiatives that they're launching, that those align with the organization's vision, with its purpose, with its goals. Those are all different things. And also you could check alignment with an ethical standard or with other external standards or even client expectations. And finally, you can help your clients find that one thing that's going to move things forward, that one key initiative or key lever that really, they should put all their eggs in this basket. That's something, again, that an outsider can do. So these are things that you might do intuitively. They're things that you might have been trained to do. But all of these things also fall into the category, or they're related to strategic thinking. They fall into the category of the competencies that strategic thinking teaches. So that's really the transition I want to make now to my discussion of strategic thinking, which will be the next slide. Okay, so on this slide, we started to break out what strategic thinking is, and I'm starting to use some examples there. So at the top, you can see that strategic thinking breaks out into two separate categories, and this level of breakout is consistent across all speakers who and thinkers and authors who talk about strategic thinking, and that's the break between logical and linear thinking and creative or nonlinear thinking. And in all writing since, I guess, about the 1970s, strategic thinking has been seen as some combination of these two. You might also hear it described as left brain, right brain thinking, the creative and the logical. Now below that, I have put 4 types of thinking, 2 against each bucket, which kind of characterize each of those 2 types of thinking. Now this is not an exhaustive list, but these 4 really do a good job of capturing the main axes of thinking across both logical and creative. And at this point, before I walk through these 4 types of thinking, I'm going to give you a very quick definition of each and take another poll. And the poll is asking which of these kinds of thinking you're best at. So Trent, maybe you could put it up and I'll speak through it. Great, thanks Trent. So I'm asking again, which one of these you're best at? You may be good at all of these. You may think you're really strong in a couple of these, but if you had to pick one, which one would it be? And the 4 types are systems thinking, which has to do with using logic to deal with systems and processes. Critical thinking, which has to do with using logic on words and arguments and ideas. Divergent thinking, which is another way of talking or saying creative, unconstrained creativity. Or synthetic thinking, which has to do with combining things in new ways. So creative under some constraint. So if you could all just select something there. Okay, great. So see a lot of people in the synthetic thinking. That's actually what I selected for myself too. And but otherwise we've got kind of an even spread. Now by the end of this session, you might decide that in fact maybe you have a different answer as we explore some of these other types of thinking, and we'll also talk about each one and some of the resources that are available for getting stronger in some of these different types of thinking. So I want to start with very quickly walk through some of these thinking styles and then really talk about the examples, because I think that's how we learn best about these things. So the first one is systems thinking. Back in the 1970s, the first time anybody put out a book called Strategic Thinking, or actually I think it was called Thinking Strategically, they were really talking about games theory. And games theory is really systems thinking. Systems thinking is about understanding how systems work, how processes flow, how inputs affect outputs. So you would be good at systems thinking if you're good at doing process flow diagrams or logic flow diagrams, if you can write code, if you can play chess, or if you understand physics, you're probably a systems thinker or you have strengths in that area. Critical thinking, on the other hand, critical thinking has to do with language. It has to do with words and symbols and thinking through the words that we use and how we say things. Critical thinking has to do with applying logic to assumptions. and options. So you'd be good at critical thinking if you're good at dissecting plots in TV shows and movies. If you're good at critiquing advertisements and understanding what the advertisers are trying to do. If you understand why politicians say the things they say and do the things they do, or if you're good at debating, you're probably strong at critical thinking. Now I want to talk about Moneyball. So you can see on the left of the screen, we have the cover of a movie starring Brad Pitt, whose name is bigger than the title of the movie. And the movie is called Moneyball, and it's the story of the Oakland A's, a baseball team in the 2002 season. And it's a story about systems thinking and critical thinking. So the systems thinking I'll start with first. Basically, the Oakland A's was a baseball team that didn't have very much money. They were always underfunded, and that meant whenever they developed good players who would be championship caliber players, they lost them to free agency. The other teams who could pay more would just snap them up when they became available. And Brad Pitt's character, a fellow named Billy Bean, who's a real person, this is a real story, came up with a new strategy, a strategy which is now called sabermetrics, but it's essentially a statistical analysis. It's an analysis of baseball that worked backwards from what do you need to win a championship, and they used an algorithm. So if you need to win a championship, you should win this many baseball games, and to win that many games, you should score this many runs, and to win to score that many runs, you need an on-base percentage that's this high. So essentially they went out and they looked for players who could score, who could get on base at a higher rate than other baseball players, but especially ones that weren't valued by the market, because the market was also looking for other characteristics that Billy Bean and the Oakland A's didn't care about. And that's how they built their team. And it took them much further into championship range than was expected for a team that was so underfunded. They didn't win the World Series. They didn't even get to the World Series, but they got so far that everybody stood up and took notice, and other teams started using that system. And I think within 2 years, Boston had used that system to win the World Series. So it's a story of systems thinking, of applying that logic to a situation. But it's also a story of critical thinking, and there's a great scene in the movie. If you've seen it, you'll know this scene. And it starts, it's a meeting of the scouting staff. So the people that have to go out and look at players and recommend them to management for hiring and recruiting. And Billy goes around all his scouts and says, what is the problem we're trying to solve? And the scouts tell him they understand the problem. They know what the problem is. They're doing the right things to solve it. Don't worry about it. It's their job. And yet it's clear as he goes from person to person that they have a very different definition of the problem from Billy. Billy understands they're addressing a strategic dilemma of being an underfunded participant in the market or in the baseball league. The scouts don't get that. They just think that they're trying to replace this person who's leaving the roster with some other similar person that can get a similar number of runs. So it's a really good sample of critical thinking. Now let's move to the other side of the table and look at creative types of strategic thinking, and specifically divergent thinking. Divergent thinking is thinking that focuses on the new, on being creative. It talks about new territories. It might be involved in imagining new ways to do business, new business models, or generating new ideas in general. If you've heard of design thinking is built around divergent thinking, although it has other components. It's a nice structured methodology. You probably are good at divergent thinking if you are a creative artist, either in your job or as a hobby. If you're good at brainstorming, or if you seek out new experiences and value doing new things, then you're probably a divergent thinker. Now, at this point, I'd like to talk about AirBnB, because AirBnB is a great example of critical thinking and divergent thinking, and specifically design thinking. So Airbnb was founded in 2007 by a couple of guys in San Francisco who put an air mattress, or 3 air mattresses actually, out in their front room and rented them out as a short-term stay option for people doing business in San Francisco. And they had some success. They made some money. I think they rented them out at $80 a night. They made pocket money. And they started to see the potential in this. And they thought, we've got a business model here. Let's start growing this thing. Now, it wasn't straightforward. They had some directions that they took that didn't pan out. They did a lot of work around matching roommates, which wasn't their business. And they did, they continued to rent air mattresses in their own space. And it was at this point that they realized, well, we really need to think through what we're doing from a design point of view. And so they used design thinking to rethink not their business model, but their customer experience. So they reworked their website, and they came up with this 3-click model so that people would land on their website and within 3 clicks would have booked accommodation. They also invested in a professional photographer to go around and take photos of all the places where they were offering accommodation to really make them look more appealing and to make the site more professional. So they turned their idea into a mildly successful startup within a couple of years, but it was still focused on air mattresses and couch surfing. It was actually called Air Mattress B&B, not Airbnb. But they had some funding, they were in an accelerator, and they started going out to investors. And it's the investors who brought the critical thinking into the game, the smart investors. Now, some of the investors they approached didn't see the potential in a couch surfing business. Who wants to invest in that? But there were some that applied some critical thinking, and they said, this is a good team. They've got an interesting idea. Maybe they could do other things. Then they also looked at the short-term stay industry and said, you know what, there's some assumptions there that could be challenged. Maybe it can be disrupted. And those investors brought that thinking and financing into Airbnb, which of course took that new name, and it took off. And from 2009 on, this just became a growth story, hitting record after record. So it's a story about having a divergent idea, applying critical thinking to it, and turning it into a business with the help of investors and with design thinking. The last type of strategic thinking, or the last bucket on my slide here, is synthetic thinking, which is really about creative thinking within constraints. So synthetic thinking is about combining existing things in new ways, coming up with a synthesis. It's about cross-pollination. It's also being called applied creative thinking. So you're probably good at this. If you're good at summarizing reports, you are good at collaborating across silos, or if you're good at creative problem solving. The last example I want to use has to do with the space race, the 1950s and 60s. So let's work our way back to the late 50s. It was the time of the Cold War. There was a tremendous tension between the United States and the Soviet Union. Both sides, both of those countries were trying to claim space exploration as for national pride purposes, as something that really signified their technological achievement. And the Soviet Union was ahead. They were achieving the big firsts. They put the first satellite into space in 1957, Sputnik. In 1959, they put the first unmanned spacecraft on the moon, crash landed the first one, soft landed the second one. And in 1961, Yuri Gagarin became the first human in space, beating out the American by about 6 weeks. So Soviet Union looked like they were ahead, and it's at this point that President Kennedy steps in. Now, Kennedy had been elected. He'd been in office for about 3 months at this time, and he really wanted to compete with the Soviets in the space race, and he wanted to win. And Kennedy realized that winning hadn't actually been defined, that everybody was to claim these first, but nobody really had said what the end point was. What are we trying to do? How do we know who wins this thing if there's no goalpost? And so what he did was he sent out his vice president, Lyndon Johnson. Johnson met with a whole range of scientific and industrial leaders. He met with leading scientists. He met with the heads of important government agencies. He met with powerful politicians and with people in the private sector. And they sat together, they brainstormed, they thought about, what are the different things that we can do in space? What are the assets that we have now? In what areas are we ahead of the Soviets? What would be some of the benefits for our economy if we invested in this, that, or the other type of approach? And Lyndon took this all, or Johnson took all this, and he took it back to Kennedy and sat down with Kennedy and a couple others. And Kennedy decided, he made the call. So he heard all this synthetic thinking went to declaring what the race would be and how we'd get there. And he declared that it's a race to put a person on the moon. He made a couple of very dramatic, inspiring speeches saying that within the decade, the United States would put a man on the moon. And of course, they achieved that. They put the massive effort together to make that happen. And one of the key reasons that Kennedy chose that marker as the effort, or the endpoint of the effort, was that he knew that neither the Soviet Union nor the United States had a rocket in development or in place that would be powerful enough to do this. So he knew that they were starting on even ground. So the Soviets were not ahead on this, and he was able to use that in making his decision. Okay, so that's kind of the walk through strategic thinking. I'd like to move on to the next slide now, please, Trent. Thanks. So here we're talking about the competencies and behaviors that come out of strategic thinking. And as you know, competencies and behaviors aren't the components. They're not the thinking you do. This is how you behave once you've learned to think these ways. These are the things you bring to your clients. And you'll see it's very similar to that list of bullets I had a few slides back. So strategic thinkers are known to bring a wide perspective. We talked about that, about analogy and history. Strategic thinkers are known to use both logic and imagination. Really, that is the core of strategic thinking. Strategic thinkers focus on intent. They find a key lever or approach. So again, both very valuable things to your clients. And strategic thinkers know how to align with vision. So all these competencies, again, you might have learned how to do some of these things in the past through other development opportunities you've had, other training you've had, or through your natural inclinations. But with strategic thinking and becoming a strategic thinker, you can deploy all of these competencies. Great, yeah, let's go to that next slide there, Trent. So just looking quickly at the time, I guess we're tracking okay. So we have time now to do a bit of a case study. I'm hoping this will be an interactive activity. And the idea is I'm going to present to you a situation. There's a lot of detail in the slide so that you don't have to memorize what I say. You can look back at the slide as we go forward. And it's a bit of a role-playing case. So I'm going to play the role of being a person running an executive education program at a university, at a business school of a university. Now, this is a real case. I really had this job. So all the situation is based on a problem that I had to deal with. And what I'm going to do is read to you or describe to you the situation I'm in, and then ask you to give me some consulting advice based on the competencies that we've already discussed. So here is the situation. So when I took over this executive education program at a business school, it came with a component, a course that was offered by not by the business school itself, but by another company, which is a huge brand. And you can see, if you look closely at the picture, you can probably guess what the brand is. I don't want to mention it because of copyright reasons. But executive education is about offering day-long courses to individuals in the business world. And in this case, a certain proportion of the executive ed programming for this business school was delivered by this other company, this big brand. It represented about a third of the revenue of my executive ed program, and it also represented about a third of the effort that we put into mounting programs. Now, this was a legacy product. This product had been around for at least 7 years with us. I mean, it'd been around longer out in the world, and it had lots of fans. The brand itself generates tremendous loyalty. People are always interested in this brand, and whenever you offer something related to the brand, you automatically get people coming in the door who just want to connect with this brand. And the content was good. They refreshed the content. I think they offered something between 3 and 5 different programs every year, one-day programs, and those were rotated, what was being offered, and the content in those programs was being updated. So it was good stuff. Now, we did it because we were trying to raise the awareness of our program. So although the content here wasn't our content, we felt that by offering this program, people would find out about exec ed, they'd find out about our business school, they'd find out about our university, and they'd start looking at our catalog and also go to other programs. So the idea was that by running this, we were lifting all of our programs. However, there were constraints and special situations related to this program that we didn't have to deal with in our other programming. One was that exclusivity. So all our other programs, we pretty much were the exclusive offering body because they were our content. But with this program, we had to commit to offering programming 2 or 3 times a year, or this brand would go off and connect with somebody else and let them offer the programming. And we were in a very competitive market. We were, for those of you around here, this is GTA, Greater Toronto area. There's 4 universities offering exec ed plus a couple of colleges in that market. So we really wanted to maintain exclusivity, which meant we had to keep running it. It was also a very one-sided contract. The brand was very concerned about their brand, how it's perceived. So they mandated what the venue had to look like, what the food that came out at lunchtime had to be, what things we could talk about or not talk about when we introduced them and when we closed it, what other literature we could distribute in the lobby or at the table. So it was a very one-sided contract. And it also, the margins were very different from all of our other programming. Our other programming was set so that we could be profitable when 10 or 15 people signed up for a program. For this, to cover the cost of the program, we basically had to have over 100 people in the room. It was a huge cost component, and that meant it couldn't be leveraged into custom work. Custom work is where you take your program that you offer publicly and you take it to an organization or a company and deliver it just to their staff, and they pay you to do that. But you couldn't do that with this program because no company or organization would want to pay the type of fee that was required for us to make money on this. So that was the situation. But the other constraint, or not constraint, but the condition that's really important to understand is that executive education is an ancillary program at the university. It does have some value in that it reaches out into the community and delivers content, learning, knowledge to the community on behalf of the university, but it's not part of the primary mission of the university, which is, of course, to teach or to conduct research, and therefore it cannot lose money. In the best of worlds, it should be bringing money in to subsidize teaching and researching, but at worst, it's got to break even. So, and of course, this program, because of its massive cost component, was always much more on the bubble as to whether or not it would be making money or not making money. So let's go back to the case. Imagine I'm the exec ed director. I've come in, I've inherited this, and I'm trying to decide, do I want to keep running this thing, or should I be shutting it down and looking at some other way to use my resources and to bring people in the door? And so I'm going to ask you now in the chat if anybody wants to suggest maybe a question or a suggestion or an option based again on the competencies of strategic thinking. I think, Trent, you're going to read if somebody does contribute?
Yeah, if something comes into the chat, I will let you know.
Okay.
Do not have anything yet. The chat is open. Nothing, Chris, at this point.
Okay. I guess one of the things that you might want to think about, I talked about bringing a wide perspective and focusing on intent, and those are a couple of things that come into play here. Does anybody have any thoughts on focus on intent? Let's go there.
So we do have one response from Maloma. Sorry if I mispronounced that. Is the program losing money or breaking even? Is the question, Chris.
So that's a really good question. So the program had been running for 7 years, and it never made significant money. So some years it broke even, some years it lost a little bit of money that could be made up through the executive. So exec ed as a whole was making money, but this program sometimes was losing money. And I think I saw Ashtosh said something.
He said, continue if adds value to the university.
Okay, so that's a good suggestion. How do we define whether it adds value though? What are you thinking of there, Ashtosh?
Like if the education program has some unique features, and so that people are attracted to go through the website or the university and look for other programs.
Okay, yep, that absolutely makes sense. That was certainly one of the considerations that we had to think through was what is the value equation? Is having this brand associated with us or this specific content available going to have a strategic outcome for us? Yeah, thank you.
So Andy posted a message saying, don't shut it down completely until you have established alternate options, then scale back.
Great. Do you want to read the other ones too, or do you want me to?
Sure, I can just go through and then maybe you can. Amuma wrote, I would try to measure the extent to which the brand affiliation attracts people to the university as a whole, if that can be measured.
Okay, let's stop there, because chronologically that was the first thing we did. So that's a great suggestion there. So you're right. A lot of the assumptions around running this program hadn't actually been confirmed. They were anecdotal. So the first thing we did when we started to think about this strategically was we actually measured the migration of individuals from this program into our other programs and determined that in fact it was a lot lower than we had been led to believe, that where we thought this program was driving registrations, it was actually having a very minimal impact. So that was great, whoever suggested that.
Steve has said that, was there a strategic plan? If so, what were the key elements and how did they align?
That's a really good question or thought. Turns out that when the business school did their strategic plan, they forgot about exec ed. And so exec ed wasn't touched specifically in the strategic planning process, but there were certainly goals that we could align with. And one of the goals was to make this business school a leader in digital transformation. So kind of speaking also to Andy's earlier point, the focus of our exec ed was starting to shift to support specifically digital transformation programming rather than generic business school programming. So yeah, that definitely is a strategic move to make.
Okay, we have two more comments here, Chris. Bilal says, does it contribute to bringing in other revenue opportunities in business? How does it contribute to overall marketing in the exec ed institution?
Great, and there was one other one?
What outcomes, sorry, this is from Renee, and is from what outcomes are clients wanting from this program that can be offered in a different / new program?
Great, okay, well those are all really good strategic questions that I would have welcomed when I was doing this, so that instead of spending the months that I spent on this, maybe I should have just pulled these people together and spent a few hours. So those are great, yes. For Bilal's question, certainly the the importance of the program to marketing and awareness is something we had to measure. And with Renee, I think I agree. One of the things that we did have to look at is there actual content? So for instance, this brand was really strong on customer service. Was there anybody else who could teach customer service the way this brand could? That was one of the questions we asked. And the final thing, just to close the story and move on, the other piece we looked at was actually eliminating the downside risk. And so what we did was we went out to a school that didn't compete with us and offered to share the program with them so that the costs were shared, marketing was extended to their audience as well as our audience, and the way we wrote the contract, because we had the relationship, we were able to offload all the financial risk to them and run the program with no risk. But in the end, even that wasn't strong enough to justify continuing to do that program when our strategic goals had changed, as was mentioned. So thanks, everybody. Those were great comments. Okay, so I guess we're going to move to this this final slide, which is really wrapping it all together. I do want to make a comment. I was talking about the Moon program when I was talking about synthetic thinking, and I want to tell a story that Neil Gaiman tells. Neil Gaiman is, of course, a fantasy author and screenwriter. He has TV shows, screenplays, comic books, comic novels, and novels. He's a good read. And he tells the story about being at a 3-day event with lots of artists, with scientists, with entrepreneurs. It was all about the future. It was a futurist event. And all these people had accomplished so many things. And he was getting a tinge of imposter syndrome himself. But he started chatting with an older gentleman at the back of the room. And the older gentleman also confessed that he was feeling the same. He said, you know, I don't belong here. I haven't done things like these people have done. I don't think I'm as smart as them. I just went where I was told and I did what I was told to do. I don't know why they wanted to hear me. And well, it turned out that was Neil Armstrong, the first man on the moon. And so if Neil Armstrong can feel imposter syndrome, then certainly there's no shame in anybody else feeling that. So I want to conclude really by looking at this this final graphic and really thinking about the blue circle on the right. And as you can see, what I want to emphasize is that each element of strategic thinking, whether it's a component, whether it's a competency, it can be learned. It can be supported by tools, but it has to be practiced. I also want to mention that something I can help with. So part of my business is mentoring and coaching groups and individuals. And if that's something that you're interested in, you can reach out to me through 50,000 Foot, through my own website, through LinkedIn, and all of that contact information will be on the final slide. Now I'm going to throw this to Trent, who's got a couple things to talk about. And then if we still have some time at the end, we will have a Q&A session. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. Much appreciated. I'm actually going to go through the next couple slides very, very fast so that we can get to questions, because we've already had a couple of questions in the chat that we haven't been able to get to. So just quickly, go check out the SkillRanch podcast. It's on YouTube. It's on the 50,000 Foot website. Bilal is talking with experts on building skills that are relevant to the consulting industry and your professional improvement. So that can be found at anchor.fm/SkillRanch on YouTube or at the 50,000 Foot blog page. 50,000 Foot, for those of you who don't know, is a community for independent consultants and small firms. We're growing. We provide services and products to help independents and small firms grow their business, meet their goals, and provide events like this where you can network, learn, and connect with others who are going through a similar time as yourself. Following page shows contact information. So, you know, to get a hold of Chris there, you can find him at redqueenstrategy.com. 50,000 Foot, I've actually put my co-owner of 50,000 Foot, Trevor, he's my identical twin. He runs the business development and partnership side of the business. So if you need to get in contact with 50,000 Foot, by all means, reach out to Trevor or through our website. And if you have questions about the SkillRanch Podcast, reach out to Bilal and he'll be happy to answer any questions you have. So that is the content we're going to go through today. We're going to spend the next few minutes having a Q&A session. We have 7 minutes left, but if people would like to stay on and ask a few more questions, by all means, we'll leave the line open and answer as many questions as we can. Before that happens, I just wanted to thank everyone for joining us today. Hope this provided you with value, and we will continue to provide you with more sessions like this to help consultants like yourself grow your businesses. So without further ado, I'm going to go back and pull some questions from the top. So Nubia from the United Kingdom, thank you for joining us. There was 2 questions. First, is it true that high achievers suffer with imposter syndrome more than others? And from a gender perspective, are women affected more than men?
So I'm not an expert at that level of information on the imposter syndrome. I do anecdotally believe that both of those things are true, but I can't speak to that authoritatively. Certainly the cases that you hear about, are often the people with very high achievements, and I've certainly seen a lot of women speak about it, but I honestly don't know if that's true.
Okay. The second question that was asked was, are you only one type of thinker, or can you be a combination? Can you develop in other types of thinking, or is it innate?
So that's 2 questions, which is great. So first, nobody is just one type of thinker. People who can do strategic thinking can also do other kinds of thinking, and people who do strategic thinking can draw on all 4 of those types. Those types of thinking don't really describe, an innate personality who only thinks, using systems thinking, or only thinks using divergent thinking. All of us can be trained to use all 4 of those things. Some people are naturally more likely to default to one or the other of those 4 categories when they're in a situation where they're helping clients, but that's just a matter of training. And then, of course, strategic thinking is only one type of thinking, and there's many, many other types of ways of thinking.
Okay, we're actually going to have Lola ask a question. Are you able to unmute yourself?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Hi, Trent. Hi, Chris. Thanks. It's been a fantastic webinar so far. My question is, from my perspective, I found that I'm quite good at strategic thinking in my workplace, which is where I've been, but I've recently left and I'm thinking of going into consulting, more along the lines of sustainability and CSR consulting. And it's also sort of like not a new field. I know it's really just getting a lot more traction and a lot more prominence as especially with the COVID-19 pandemic. So my question really is, given that I haven't worked in a consulting firm or like, let's say the Big Four, etc., but I do find that I am able to answer some of these questions, and I do really get excited at the prospect. Just even the case study that you provided today, really thinking about all the different angles. So is it a case of me just not having sufficient confidence in the fact that when I do get the substance, I can think critically around these issues and always deliver value? Just that I have never really called myself a consultant before. Because I feel like if I do want to go into that, if I don't have the experience, say working in a consulting firm, even though I can get the tools, that it would just, I wouldn't be perceived as someone that, could be trusted on the subject.
Well, that's a great question. I think you're hitting a couple of the points that I did cover in a different way, so that's great. I'll try to unpack that a bit in terms of whether you can call yourself a consultant or not having worked in a consulting company, I don't think that that's a question that anybody would challenge you on. Anybody who goes into business to help and advise clients is a consultant, so you don't have to really worry about that. But whether you can be perceived as an expert or as a useful consultant, as a good consultant, really depends on how you position yourself. And I think that that's how a lot of new consultants maybe fall down, is that they assume that the only person who can position themselves as a consultant is someone who has mastered this whole field, whether it's sustainability or supply chain management or whatever, and that you know, somebody else trying to offer consulting services who is not intimately familiar with every aspect of that field is therefore a fraud. That's not the case. You just have to be clear up front with what it is you're bringing to the table. If you bring to the table a certain familiarity with the field, but a divergent viewpoint, but a questioning viewpoint, but a challenging viewpoint, that's a valuable consulting skill. The people you're helping, it really depends on your client set. You might be helping people that know way more about sustainability than you'll ever know, but you're helping them to understand what they know and to put that forward and to come up with a plan and to focus on achieving that plan. If you're going into a different firm, let's say a firm that doesn't know a thing about sustainability and they need a sustainability expert, then yeah, you better be sure that you are in fact that expert and that you know enough to help them significantly.
Thanks, Chris. That has actually been more helpful than you can imagine, because I just felt like I needed to be the expert and I have like 100 tabs open, just everything all at once. But yeah, it helps to know that even if I bring in the way I think, which could be design thinking or it could be synthetic thinking, that is also adding value.
Yeah, absolutely. I think as long as you're comfortable in the field, you know, then it's about what you bring to the table as a thinker.
Wonderful. Thanks, Chris. Thanks a lot. We have another question from Matthew Birch, Chris. It's how does the imposter syndrome translate into strategic pricing and how you offer your services to clients? How should a new client proceed?
So that's yeah, a really good question, Matthew. You're absolutely right that the imposter syndrome can really undercut how we value ourselves and therefore undercut how we charge our clients for our time and service. I haven't thought that through, so I can't offer you a glib response. All I can say is that I think it comes back to how we deal with the imposter syndrome in general, which is that we have to step back. We have to do some metacognition. We have to think about how we're thinking, think about the negative thoughts, the disparagement that we're unloading on ourselves, and see whether or not they're contributing to our pricing model. If we are feeling that we're putting too low a value on our time because we have this negative self-talk, then maybe it makes sense to, again, using kind of the generic approach to imposter syndrome, talk to a coach, talk to a colleague, talk to a competitor even, and understand whether or not, you know, what our true value is, and therefore, and then translate that into our pricing model. So I think you're right to raise the flag, and hopefully one of those generic strategies will work.
Great. Do we have any other questions at this time? Matthew, thanks you for your response, Chris.
Oh, okay. You're welcome, Matthew.
So we are past 2 Eastern Standard Time. I'd like to thank you, Chris, for taking time to spend with us, to give us these great points that we can take forward. For those of you on the call who may still have questions, please reach out to Chris or ourselves. We'll be happy to help. 50,000 Foot is here to help the community. So if you have any questions, please reach out to us. We'd love to chat. Chris, thank you very much. Everyone else who joined, thank you. Have a great day. Really appreciate it.